Could you comment on the possibility of competing against monopolies that the Justice Department seems to, for some strange reason, to avoid prosecuting for antitrust?
You know, one of the things I feel very strongly about is that, well, I'll go back. The day we started Apple Computer, IBM was far more powerful in the computer industry than Microsoft and Intel are today. The day we started Apple, because they not only controlled the technologies, they controlled the customer. They had direct contact with the customer. And so we should have just given up. I mean, Woz, I should have just nudged Woz, hey, forget it. We don't have a chance. But we were too stupid to know that. We hadn't gone to business school. We didn't read the Wall. We didn't even know what the Wall Street Journal was. I'd never seen a Wall Street Journal. And that served us well. So, what can I say? I think every good product that I've ever seen in this industry and pretty much anywhere is because a group of people cared deeply about making something wonderful that they and their friends wanted. You know? They wanted to use it themselves. And that's how the Apple I came about, that's how the Apple II came about, that's how the Macintosh came about, and that's almost everything I know that's good has come about. It didn't come about because people were trembling in the corner, worried about some big company stomping on them. Because if the big company made the product that was right, then most of these things wouldn't have happened. I mean, if Woz and I could have went out and plunked down, $2,000 and bought an Apple II, why would we have built one? We weren't trying to start a company. We were trying to get a computer. So I'll tell you right now, I'll give you an example. I get about 200 email messages a day, sans all of the get-rich-quick ones from the internet. And I've been in that mode now for 5, 6, 7 years. And I've used about and email to me is the most important app I use. And I've used every email system I know of out there. And I can tell you that the one on Next Step or Rhapsody is literally, almost an order of magnitude better, more productive than anything else I know of. I mean, I walk around Apple, and they're using Eudora. They're using the worst mail system in the world at Apple. And I know we could improve the productivity inside Apple 30% if we just give them a good email system. And so it's amazing to me that something as obvious as email is so broken out there. Netscape's is awful. I mean, everybody's is awful. And if something as obvious as email is so broken, I'll give you, and the other one I mentioned before, spreadsheets. If you used Improv or Quantrix for a week, you would go, how come this hasn't completely replaced Excel? For 75% of the people out there. Yeah, there's 25% that'll still want Excel, for good reasons. But for 75% of the people, why hasn't this replaced it? And there are no answers to these questions, except let's go do it. And that's my attitude about this thing. The other thing I feel very, very, very strongly is it's incredibly stupid for Apple to get in a position where for Apple to win, Microsoft has to lose. That's really dumb. I mean, I don't expect the federal government to break up Microsoft for a lot of reasons, the least of which is the federal government's a monopoly. I mean, they're buddies. So, Microsoft's a fact of life. They're like the air we breathe, Yeah. So, or probably the better analogy is like bottled water, because you do have to buy it. But nonetheless, Apple can win without having to have Microsoft lose. I firmly believe that. And hopefully, Microsoft will increasingly over time realize that that is the case, and that Apple represents a quite profitable part of their business. And they seem to be coming around to that point of view. So, and there's been some alliances announced between Microsoft and Apple, and so I think that I really, really strongly feel that setting Microsoft up as Satan and having a holy war against Microsoft would be exactly the wrong thing for Apple to do. There are so many opportunities out there where Apple can really have tremendous advantage and not have to go head-to-head with Microsoft, but really go right to the customers. Yes, back middle.
I was hoping that you would venture an opinion this morning on how you see the future evolution of the Macintosh compatible market.
I think the Macintosh compatible, first of all, let me state my opinion on this. It's just my personal opinion. I believe Apple should license everything, with a few exceptions that I'll go into in a minute. But I think that Apple should get a fair price for it. And I think the clone setup, the way it was set up, was done really poorly, 3-4 years ago. For one thing, Apple licenses the hardware designs and forces the clone makers to use them. That's stupid. Let the clone makers do their own hardware designs. Let them do whatever hardware they want, right? Don't tie their hands. But then again, don't give away. I mean, if they want to OEM Apple hardware and pay extra for that, if they want to use Apple hardware, fine. But if they don't, let them design their own. And on the software, Apple should get a fair price based on volume. As an example, if I'm a clone maker, as you know, some of the low-end Macintoshes, whether they're compatibles or not, probably don't make much money. Matter of fact, you could even imagine they might lose money just to get people into the fold. And to offset those kinds of low-margin products, you need some higher-margin products at the high end. So if you're a clone maker, you think, wow, I think I'll give Apple $10 for the software, and I'll go after the $5,000 Mac market. Well, that would be really stupid for Apple to do, because this clone maker is just a leech. They're living off the fact that Apple's got this business model to not make much money at some levels and try to eke some back at the high level. And by just going after the high level and paying $10 for the software, that wouldn't be fair. So you want people to pay more money if they're in lower volume, because the only way they can get to higher volume is to make some of those medium and low-priced clones too, and make less margin. And if they're doing that, then they ought to get a lower price across their whole range of products. So I've been advocating to eliminate the licensing of the hardware and let the clone makers do whatever they want, and B, to raise the price or the royalty of the software to a reasonable level and make it a scale based on volume. And I think that's the right thing to do, and some of the clone makers have been going ballistic over it. It's incredibly stupid. I mean, I don't think they ought to pay more for Rhapsody, as an example, than they do for other modern operating systems to license. But that's not 10 or 20 or 30 bucks. So, and I think that's where we'll end up, and I think everybody will be fine, and I think the clone makers will have a much easier time, and they won't have to dealing with Apple's hardware, and maybe they'll make some better hardware, and maybe they'll make some worse hardware, and the customers will decide. And I'm all for it. I just think Apple ought to get a little bit of value out of their software and not just have the clone makers picking off their high-margin products and paying $10 a copy. If they want to pick off the high-margin products and pay a fair price for the software, let them have at it. So that's how I feel about that. But I'm not making a decision. Yes?
Even so, I'm glad you're here. Thanks.
What's that?
That you're not, even if you're not making decisions, thank you for being here.
Oh, sure.
You mentioned managing complexity. There's a lot of people out there who are either not using computers or think of computers as something they have to babysit, that they work for their computers. How can we get computers to where they work for people instead?
I don't really know. I mean, I'm not sure what you mean. I don't feel I work for my computer. I feel it's a little invasive. I mean, I have a T1 in my house, and you sort of get in the habit of of answering your email, within a few seconds after it arrives, so it can be invasive on a family life.
Yeah. I just think it can serve us more and go out and do things for us without us having to sort of watch. And, we have this whole system of I click once, the computer does one thing, I click another thing, the computer does one thing, and it never goes out and works for me for 15 or 20 minutes. I mean, well, compiling, but...
I guess my point of view is a little different on that. My point of view is that I am routinely running 10 to 15 applications at once on my computer. They are all routinely talking to each other in a very wonderful way that I don't have to pay much attention to, and I can move things between them very easily. And I'm connected in an extremely high-speed, easy, transparent, productive way with my colleagues. It's so much better than anything I see in the Windows or the Mac world today that I will be happy if over the next 12 to 24 months, as you guys roll out your apps, that we can just bring this to everybody.
Cool.
Secondly, I know there's at least 20 more apps that I'd love to be using that haven't been written yet. And if we can make those apps really easy to write, and if we can keep the Mac market far less expensive to market into than the Wintel market, so that you can get them to market, then we can all get a chance to use those great apps that you guys are going to write. Okay. So my view is that for the next several years, like 3-4 years, our job is not to reinvent the world, is to take something that we know exists already, but hardly anybody's got it, and get it out to them. And it's to be honest, it's a lot like Xerox PARC. I mean, Xerox PARC had some of the things that were in a Macintosh, just nobody else had them. Well, there's thousands of people out there that use this now, but there aren't millions. And if we can get that out there, I think it's going to change a lot. And fortunately, a lot of it is tried and true and been polished and refined, and it's pretty bulletproof. So we're not going to have to go through any embarrassing early moments, I hope.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
You mentioned tools, if I may. I noticed the great, wonderful next step demo where we have a visual way of building the interface is great. And then all of a sudden we're back into text to do a little coding to add a few things. And there is already something that visually programs called Program. And it's probably a lost cause, but something like that has got to get here one day. And you know what? In the meantime, I'll go ahead and I'll do the next step. I'll do it. I'm doing it.
Yeah, see,
we want that too.
Here's the deal.
Okay.
The way you get programmer productivity is not by increasing the lines of code per programmer per day. That doesn't work. The way you get programmer productivity is by eliminating lines of code you have to write. Right? The line of code that's the fastest to write, that never breaks, that doesn't need maintenance, is the line you never had to write. Right?
Right.
So what the goal here is to eliminate 80% of the code that you have to write for your app. That's the goal.
Okay.
It's not to, and so along the way, if we can provide WYSI this and WYSI that and visual this and visual that, well, that's fine. But the high order bit is to eliminate 80% of the code. When you drag a line in Interface Builder, you're eliminating code of one form. But I've seen a lot of visual but that only goes so far. Maybe we can go further. I've seen a lot of demos of things that try to take it all the way back into the algorithmic part of the code base, and none of them have ever been any good. If there are any good ones out there, show them to Avi, and he'll show them to me.